it's very simple, but there are so many caveats while investing to index fund.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
not simple as you go to any broker and buy the index fund, or let's say ETF, because then you have to see the tax implications as well. Then you have to see the estate tax as well. In sad case of, let's say, your demise, then you have to think about so many things. So can you delve onto a bit?
Sure, sure. And by the way, this is one of the mistakes that I made when I first started.
Okay.
Because when I first started reading and learning about ETFs and investing in ETFs, you typically get exposed when you do that. You get exposed to the US ETFs that are basically covered in those books or manuals or even articles that you read all over the internet. But there's a catch here. The catch is when you invest in ETFs that are domiciled or that are, let's say, created and managed in the US, there's a catch. And the catch is, first off, you pay 30% of dividends withholding tax, which means for any dividends you get, 30% of that is automatically withheld at the source by your broker. And people think that, well, I live in the UAE, why do I have to pay that tax? This tax is actually created for those who are non-Americans. So for anyone who's not American or not living in the US, this tax applies, even if we're living in the UAE. So living in the UAE, although this is a tax-free country, that doesn't basically shield you from the 30% of withholding tax.
Correct.
And that is one tax. The other more serious tax that people don't know about is that when you invest in the US market, in case something, for example, in case the investor passes away, up to 40% of that money could get basically,
the government can take it away
exactly
as a tax.
Correct. So we call this inheritance tax or estate. The technical term is estate tax. And unfortunately, people don't know that. So, and let me give that, let me explain that using an example. So for example, if I have $100,000 worth of Apple stocks, if I die, basically 40% of that money, or to be more accurate, anything below $60,000 is okay. Anything above $60,000 will get taxed up to 40%. So imagine like probably half of this money will go away in taxes instead of my family using that money to support themselves. So the catch here is to avoid, if you're not American, it's best to avoid US ETFs. And instead, there are other ETFs that have the exact same basket or the same construction, let me say, or the same components, but instead of being domiciled or created and managed in the US, they are created and managed, or their legal structure is actually created in Ireland, which is a tax-friendly location or country for non-Americans like you and me.
Yeah.
So basically, for non-Americans, my advice is, advice is a big word. What I would say for non-Americans, avoid the American or the US domiciled ETFs and focus instead on ETFs that are issued in Europe. These ETFs typically have UCITS or UCITS in the name. So if the ETF has UCITS in the name, it means it's published, or sorry, it's created and it's domiciled in Europe, typically in Ireland or in Luxembourg or some other countries as well. Ireland is probably one of the best countries for ETFs because of its tax rules.
Right. You mentioned 30% tax on dividends on the US domiciled ETF. So what about those Irish domiciled ETFs? Are those also like they must have some tax, but not 30%, right?
That's correct. So the same ETF, let's take as an example an ETF that tracks the S&P 500. And for those who don't know, the S&P 500 is basically a basket that tracks the top 500 stocks in the US. And there is a couple of multiple ETFs in the US that track the S&P 500. For example, SPY or SPY or VOO, just as an example. So these track the 500 companies or the S&P 500. In Ireland, there are similar ETFs. Sorry, I forgot the ticker symbols for those, or the ticker symbol is just the 3 or 4 letters that describe the actual ETF for those who don't know that. So the same ETF or similar ETFs exist in Europe. So if you're into SPY, which is the US S&P 500, you end up paying 30% in dividend withholding. However, if you are with the exact same thing, I think it's VUSA, if I'm not wrong. Don't quote me for this, but so if you're in the exact same thing, which is the S&P 500 that is domiciled in Ireland, instead of 30%, your tax bill is reduced to 15%. And this is as good as it gets for non-Americans. Okay. I mean, we cannot really dodge this 15%, but at least instead of paying 30, now we're paying 15%, which is great. And the other advantage is, even if I cross 60,000, I reach 100, 200, even $1 million, no, there's no risk of estate tax because your money, I mean, the U.S. estate tax rules do not apply for or to funds that are domiciled in Ireland.